Borders are no longer neutral lines. They are active front lines in a new form of conflict, where documents once treated as routine now function as weapons of leverage. The passport, once a symbol of mobility, is being re-engineered into a tool of pressure, exclusion, and strategic advantage. For the United States, it has become a subtle yet decisive weapon in shaping alliances, punishing rivals, and signaling who belongs in the global system and who does not. Subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments what you're seeing on the ground so you stay a step ahead. Global mobility is undergoing a structural shift. Nations are recalibrating their approach to borders, not only for health or terrorism, but as instruments of geopolitical pressure. Where global travel once expanded steadily, access is now retracting. Agreements once seen as irreversible are being quietly undone. In this climate, every checkpoint becomes more than a logistical barrier. It becomes a political statement. The passport is no longer just identification. It is leverage. The closing of borders is not uniform. It is selective, targeted, and highly strategic. Trade blocs tighten internally while hardening externally. States use mobility restrictions to test resilience and measure political loyalty. The United States leverages its role as a global hub, granting or denying access as a silent mechanism of enforcement. The shift is not loud, but its impact is cumulative. Millions of travelers face unexpected denials while governments adapt policy in real time. Globalization had promised frictionless travel. That promise is now unraveling. Visas, health declarations, biometric enrollment, and real-time background checks create a landscape of constant filtering. Each layer of friction accumulates until movement itself becomes conditional. The outcome is not chaos, but a deliberate reshaping of who moves easily, who faces obstacles, and who is locked out altogether. Behind the policy language lies a central dynamic. Trust is eroding. States are unwilling to treat foreign citizens as neutral guests. Instead, they are viewed as potential liabilities, bargaining chips, or intelligence opportunities. This distrust reframes mobility as a controlled privilege. The United States has been among the fastest to adapt, setting a tone others now replicate. The result is a new reality where borders are less about territory and more about influence. Access becomes a negotiation. Entry is a message. Denial is a sanction. And the passport sits at the core of this silent but escalating conflict. Passports and visas are no longer predictable. Exemptions once considered stable are collapsing under political strain. Visa-free regimes are being suspended with little notice, leaving travelers stranded or forced into costly applications. Electronic travel authorizations, marketed as efficient, now serve as preemptive filters for political alignment. A single flagged connection, digital trace, or minor inconsistency can mean rejection before departure. The collapse is not uniform. It follows strategic priorities. U.S. partners retain access while rivals face tightening restrictions. Even close allies find themselves downgraded when disagreements emerge. The passport is no longer a universal document. It is a ranking system, mapping global hierarchies into physical checkpoints. Those at the bottom experience mobility as uncertainty, delay, and exclusion. Revocations are increasing quietly. States withdraw visa waivers not with speeches but with bureaucratic adjustments. The United States pressures partners to follow suit, aligning global systems to its intelligence priorities. A refusal to share data or adopt UN-backed screening technologies can lead to sudden suspension of agreements. The message is clear. Mobility is conditional on compliance. ETAs and digital pre-screenings have redefined sovereignty. They shift control upstream, away from airports and toward databases. Travelers are now vetted long before boarding. For Washington, this creates leverage not only over individuals, but over governments whose citizens depend on access. The document's symbolic neutrality has vanished. It is now a political instrument. The trajectory is toward fragmentation. The passport's power is not weakening but concentrating. Where once it enabled universal movement, it now reflects divisions, alliances, and the shifting fault lines of global competition. And the United States is ensuring its own document remains both shield and sword in this new environment. Security and surveillance now anchor border systems. Artificial intelligence is embedded in immigration controls, scanning documents, facial patterns, and digital footprints. Entry is no longer decided solely by human officers, but by opaque algorithms trained on data the traveler cannot contest. A silent profile follows each passport, expanding beyond national identity into a digital dossier. The system creates asymmetry. States with advanced surveillance demand reciprocal transparency from partners. Those unwilling or unable to provide it risk exclusion. Washington sets the standard, exporting its models to allies and embedding them in international databases. Compliance means alignment. Resistance risks marginalization. Risk categorization is automated. A traveler can be flagged by past online behavior, financial transactions, or proximity to known individuals. The process is invisible and irreversible at the border. The individual faces a binary outcome, entry or denial. The efficiency masks the reality that error rates persist and appeal is nearly impossible. Data integration extends beyond immigration. Airlines, financial institutions, and health authorities feed information into centralized hubs. This creates a surveillance ecosystem where the passport is just one identifier among many. For the traveler, it is the visible layer of a much deeper system. For the United States, it provides control not only of borders but of flows of information. The consequence is deterrence. Travelers self-regulate, avoiding regions, activities, or even digital behavior that might trigger scrutiny. Borders thus shape not only physical movement but psychological conduct. The passport functions as the interface for a much larger mechanism of control, operated with strategic precision. Perceptions of travelers are shifting unevenly. Nationality is no longer a neutral marker, but a signal of risk, status, and strategic weight. Americans, once welcomed broadly, now encounter resistance in certain regions. Rising tensions with China, Russia, and parts of the global South generate suspicion toward U.S. passports that once guaranteed access. In some regions, Americans face longer questioning, additional checks, or outright denial. The erosion of automatic goodwill highlights the decline of uncontested U.S. influence. Mobility is becoming fragmented along geopolitical lines, where trust depends less on treaties and more on political alignment at that moment. Contrast this with other nationalities. European Union passports retain privileged access in parts of Africa and the Middle East. Asian passports, particularly Japanese and Singaporean, still benefit from extensive visa-free networks. Meanwhile, citizens from politically unstable states find themselves blocked across most borders. The hierarchy is shifting, but Americans are no longer at the top without question. The perception extends beyond official policies. Local sentiment influences enforcement. Incidents of hostility, denial, or selective treatment at checkpoints often reflect wider geopolitical narratives. An American traveler may become the embodiment of U.S. foreign policy in places where tensions run high. This evolution demonstrates that mobility is no longer simply about documents. It is about reputation, trust, and perceived alignment. For the United States, the challenge is maintaining the credibility of its passport while leveraging it as a tool of control. For travelers, the gap between expectation and reality is widening. Risks and consequences are intensifying. Detentions at borders are increasing, often without explanation. Deportations occur within hours, leaving travelers little recourse. What might once have been a clerical error now carries permanent consequences, including entry bans extending years or decades. The margin for error has disappeared. Minor mistakes are magnified. An incomplete form, a misreported detail, or a digital footprint inconsistent with declared purpose can result in immediate rejection. Automated systems interpret anomalies as threats, and officers follow algorithmic guidance with limited discretion. The process is efficient but unforgiving. For the United States, this environment offers leverage. By shaping partner systems, it extends its influence globally. For individuals, the risks are asymmetric. Some nationalities are consistently scrutinized, while others enjoy relative ease. The unpredictability undermines trust in mobility as a stable process. Consequences extend beyond individuals. Families are separated, business operations disrupted, and academic exchanges curtailed. The cumulative effect is a chilling of transnational engagement. Borders are no longer barriers to be crossed, but deterrents that reshape behavior far in advance. The strategic message is that mobility is fragile. States, led by Washington, use this fragility as leverage. Travelers pay the cost, but governments calculate the gains. The passport becomes a liability as much as a tool, its value shifting with political currents. The future points toward further stratification. In the short term, expect more sudden suspensions of visa waivers, particularly targeting states seen as unreliable partners. Digital pre-clearance systems will tighten, expanding the scope of surveillance and accelerating denials before departure. Medium term, passports will merge deeper into biometric ecosystems. The distinction between identity, health, finance, and movement will blur. Washington will maintain influence by setting technological standards others must adopt to retain access. The result will be less sovereignty for smaller states and greater dependency on USWAT-aligned systems. Travel will become increasingly conditional. The privilege of mobility will be concentrated among a smaller set of nations, while others face systemic exclusion. The passport will remain a status marker, but when increasingly tied to political alignment rather than national development alone. Unexpected disruptions will continue. Political disputes, sanctions, or sudden crises will translate quickly into mobility restrictions. Travelers will bear the immediate consequences, while governments leverage the disruptions for strategic messaging. Predictability will erode further. The long-term implication is clear. Mobility itself is becoming a battlefield. The United States has weaponized its passport, not with overt declarations, but with systemic adjustments. Other powers will respond, creating competing systems of control. The traveler stands at the intersection, where movement becomes negotiation, and the passport a declaration of allegiance. Global mobility is no longer a neutral process, but a contested domain. The United States has positioned its passport as both shield and weapon, shaping who moves where and under what terms. The implications extend beyond borders into influence, alliances, and the balance of power. For travelers and states alike, the message is clear. Mobility is conditional, and conditions are shifting rapidly. Stay informed. Stay ahead. Subscribe now and join the conversation below.